The word came down at dawn, and by noon the Duke of Ravensmore had banished his wife to the one place in the kingdom no living soul would willingly go. Greywater Hold, Eleanor repeated, because she did not at first believe the parchment in her hand had said it. The seal was his own, the raven and the broken tower, pressed into wax the color of old wine. You are sending me to the cursed marches. I am sending you where you cannot do further harm. Julian, Duke of Ravensmore, did not turn from the long window of the gallery. Beyond the glass the summer gardens of Ravenscourt lay golden and shimmering in the heat, the gravel walks pale as bone, the roses gone heavy and overblown on their stems. His shoulders filled the width of the casement. He had not raised his voice once, not all morning, and that was the worst of it. A shouting man could be reasoned with. A quiet one had already decided. "Look at me when you cast me out," she said. He turned. She had married this face 2 years ago in the cathedral at Ardennes, with half the peerage watching and the king's own blessing read aloud. She had thought it a handsome face then, grave and dark-browed. The jaw of a man who broke horses and held the western border against the raiders out of the fells. She had not yet learned how cold it could go. His eyes moved over her, the travelling habit she had already been made to put on, indigo wool too warm for July, the dust of the courtyard on her hem, and something flickered in them and was gone. "The escort leaves within the hour," he said. "Mind the heat. The road to the marches is dry this time of year. That is all." Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that, later, when she had time to be proud of anything. 2 years your wife, and that is the whole of your farewell. Mind the heat. "What would you have me say, Eleanor?" The truth would do. She crossed the gallery toward him, her boots loud on the parquet, and she watched his hand settle on the back of a chair, not gripping it, only resting there, the knuckles pale. "You believe I betrayed you. You will not tell me how, or to whom, or on whose word. You have tried me in a court of one, and found me guilty before the breakfast was cleared. At least give me the charge. You know the charge. I do not." "The letters," he said, and for the first time something cracked through the cold, not loud, but there, a hairline in marble. "The letters to Lord Carrow's house. In your hand. Sealed with your ring. Found in the saddlebag of a man taken on the fell road 3 nights past, riding hard for the enemy line." The floor seemed to tilt under her. She had heard the name Carrow, only as one hears the name of a distant storm. A baron of the eastern reaches. A man the king watched with narrowed eyes. "I have never written to Lord Carrow in my life. They were in your hand. Then your eyes have been deceived, or you wish to be deceived. And I cannot tell which is the greater cruelty." She was close enough now to see the muscle move in his jaw, to catch the scent of him, leather and the bitter green of the rue that grew along the south wall, crushed where he must have walked through it that morning, before he came to ruin her. "Julian, I am carrying your name. I would sooner cut off my own hand than lift it against this house." For a moment, 1 breath, 2, she thought she had reached him. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then away, out to the burning gardens. "The horses are waiting," he said. And that was the end of it. The courtyard at Ravenscourt was a furnace by the time they brought her trunk down. Heat came up off the cobbles in sheets, and the air smelled of hot stone and horse, and the dung-sweet rot of fallen apricots beneath the espaliered trees along the wall. 6 men of the ducal guard sat their mounts in the white glare, sweating in their leathers, none of them meeting her eye. At their head was a grizzled sergeant she knew by sight, Halloran, who had taught her to sit a horse properly her first winter as a bride, laughing at her town manners, kind to her then. He was not laughing now. He swung down and held the stirrup for her without a word, and she saw that his hand was not quite steady on the leather. "Sergeant Halloran." She kept her voice low, for him alone. "How long is the road?" 5 days, my lady, if the wells along the high track are not dry." He hesitated. 6, more like, in this heat. "And what waits at the end of it?" "I have heard Greywater spoken of all my life, and never once is a place a person goes to live. The old soldier's throat worked. Above them a window stood open on the gallery, and though she did not look up, she felt the shape of her husband behind the glass, watching his wife loaded onto a horse like a debt being paid. "It is a border keep, my lady," Halloran said carefully. Older than the duchy. It holds the mouth of the Greywater Pass, where the fell country comes down into the kingdom. There has been a garrison there since before anyone's grandfather. You are not answering me. No, my lady. He looked at the cobbles. Folk say the hold is cursed. They say the last 3 commanders sent to hold it did not, that they came to grief, each within a season. They say the well runs bitter, and the men there have forgotten how to be men. The Duke's father shut it up half a ruin, and let the wild garrison rot. Nobody is sent to Greywater who is meant to come back. He drew a breath. I am sorry. You asked for the truth, and I'll not lie to a lady who once shared her bread with me on a cold road. Thank you, Halloran. She set her foot in the stirrup, and rose into the saddle, and the indigo wool stuck to her at once in the heat. That is the first honest thing anyone has said to me since the sun came up. They rode out under the raised portcullis, and Eleanor did not look back at the window. She had decided, somewhere in the last hour, that she would not give him that. Whatever he saw of her going, he would see her spine, and not her face. The road climbed. For 2 days it ran through the soft country she knew, wheat going gold, hedgerows white with the last of the elderflower, villages where children ran out to gape at the riders, and then shrank back when they understood whose colors these were, and where they rode. The word went ahead of them. Somehow, it always did. By the second evening, the cottagers had stopped coming out at all. Doors closed as the column passed. Once, at a crossroads shrine, Eleanor saw an old woman make a sign against ill fortune in their direction, and she understood it was not meant for her, but for the destination stitched into the very banner above her head. On the 3rd day the country changed. The green failed by degrees. The hedges gave way to dry stone walls, and then to no walls at all. Only the long brown shoulders of the fells rolling up to a sky bleached almost white with heat. The streams they crossed ran low, and the wells, when they found them, gave water that tasted of iron and old leaves. The men spoke less. At night they kept the fires high, though the days were scorching, and they set a double watch. And Eleanor lay in her small tent and listened to the wind come down off the high country, carrying a sound she could not name. Not quite a voice, not quite the cry of a bird, a thin keening that ran along the edge of hearing, and then was gone. The fell wind, Halloran said, when she asked him at the cold grey breakfast. It does that in the passes. The men don't love it. He did not say what the men believed it was. He did not have to. On the 5th day they came to Greywater. She smelled it before she saw it. Wood smoke gone sour, and under that the green stink of standing water, of a moat or a cistern, left too long. Then the track turned around a shoulder of black rock, and the hold was simply there, hunched in the throat of the pass where the fells came down and pinched the road to a ribbon. It was built of the same dark stone as the crags around it, so that at first the eye could not tell where the mountain ended and the wall began. One tower had lost its top to some old violence and stood jagged against the sky. The banner above the gate hung limp and faded, its device worn to a ghost. Crows lifted off the battlements as they approached and wheeled, calling, and did not settle again. Sweet mercy, murmured one of the young guardsmen behind her, and then went quiet, ashamed. The gates stood open. That was the first wrong thing. A border keep at the mouth of an enemy pass, in the dry weeks of campaigning season, and the gate hung open like the mouth of something asleep. No sentry called the challenge. No horn sounded. Eleanor walked her horse under the broken arch and into the bailey, and reined up, and what she saw there she would carry the rest of her life. Men. Perhaps 40 of them, perhaps fewer. It was hard to count, because they did not stand like soldiers in any order, but lay and sprawled and crouched in the shade of the walls like things washed up by a flood. Their leathers were green with mold at the seams. One sharpened a blade with no edge left to sharpen. the stone going back and forth, his eyes on nothing. Another sat in the full hammering sun, with his face turned up to it, lips moving. A cook fire smoked weakly in a corner, with no one tending it. The whole place stank of men who had stopped washing because there was no longer any reason to, and over it all hung that thin keening on the wind. Closer now, threading down out of the broken tower, a figure detached itself from the shadow of the gatehouse and came toward her, a big man gone to ruin, his beard matted, a captain's sash filthy across his chest. So, his voice was a ruin too, cracked and amused. His Grace sends us a lady, a fine lady, in her fine blue, all the way up the dry road. He looked her over and laughed, and the laugh turned into a cough, and the cough ended, and he spat. What did you do, my lady, to earn Greywater? Burn down a church? Poison a bishop? Behind him a few of the men had roused enough to watch, their eyes flat and curious. Doesn't matter. Nothing matters here. You'll learn that. The hold takes the spine out of a body, week by week, and then you stop minding. We've all stopped minding. Haven't we, lads? No one answered him. The blade went back and forth on the dead stone. Eleanor sat very still in the saddle, and she was aware of Halloran's hand drifting toward his sword behind her, and of the 6 clean men of the ducal escort gone tight and silent at her back, and of the heat, and the smell, and the keening, and the worn ghost of a banner hanging dead above a fortress her husband had sent her to moulder in, and something in her, something she had not known was there until this exact moment, until she had been stripped of her name and her home and her good fame, and set down at the bottom of the kingdom, with nothing left to lose. Something in her stood up. "What is your name, Captain?" she said. He blinked. "Brennan, Garrison Commander. What's left of one?" Captain Brennan. She swung down from the horse before Halloran could reach the stirrup, and her boots came down in the filth of the bailey, and she did not flinch from it. She was a head shorter than the man, and she walked straight up to him until he had to look down at her, and she let him smell the dust of 5 days' hard road on her and see that she had not wept it off. "You have asked what I did to earn this place. I will tell you. I did nothing. I was sent here on a lie, by a man who could not be troubled to learn the truth, and I have ridden 5 days in the worst heat of the summer to arrive at the end of the world and find it guarded by men who have decided that the end of the world is a comfortable place to lie down." Her voice carried now, clear and cold and ringing off the black stone, and along the walls heads came up. "I have lost everything a woman can be made to lose. Do you understand what that makes me, Captain?" He stared at her. "No, my lady. It makes me dangerous," Eleanor said, "because there is nothing left in the world that anyone can take from me to make me afraid." She turned from him, slowly, and looked along the slumped ranks of the garrison, into one ruined face after another. "On your feet. All of you. I do not care what you have been told about this place. I do not care what you believe is coming down off that mountain in the night. From this hour the gate of Greywater Hold does not stand open, and its commander does not lie in the sun talking of how nothing matters. Something matters. I am here, and I intend to live, and you are going to help me do it whether the curse likes it or no. Now stand up." For one long, terrible moment nothing happened. The crows called. The blade scraped once more on the stone, and stopped, and then, here and there along the wall, one man and then another began, slowly, as though they had forgotten how, to rise to their feet. She did not know yet that the man taken on the fell road with her forged letters in his saddlebag had not been riding alone. She did not know that Lord Carrow's true correspondent sat even now at Ravenscourt, close enough to the Duke to pour his wine. She did not know that the thin keening in the broken tower was not a curse at all, but a thing with a name and a cause, and that finding the cause would be the first stone she laid in a wall that would one day astonish a kingdom. She knew only that 40 broken men were getting to their feet, because a banished woman had told them to, and that somewhere 5 days south a duke believed he had buried her. He had not. He had planted her. That night, when the gate was shut and barred for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, Eleanor stood on the wall walk in the cooling dark and looked north, into the black mouth of the pass where the enemy country began, and she listened to the keening, and she did not look away from it. My lady. Halloran had come up the worn steps behind her, quiet for a big man. He would have to start south again at dawn. His orders were to deliver her and return. I'd not leave you here. If you'll say the word, I'll take you up behind me and we'll ride for the coast and a ship, and let his grace whistle for his prisoner. And you would hang for it, and I would run for the rest of my life with a stranger's crime on my back. She shook her head, watching the dark. No, Halloran, I am done running before I have begun. A lie sent me here. I mean to send the truth home, in its place. She glanced at him. When you reach Ravenscourt, will you carry a message for me? Any words you like, my lady. Tell him nothing. She turned back to the pass, and the wind off the high fells lifted the loose hair at her temple, warm and strange, and smelling of stone. Let him hear nothing of me at all. Let him wonder. A man who wishes to forget a thing cannot bear, in the end, to be allowed to. Give him silence, sergeant. It will cost him more than any letter I could write. Below them in the bailey a fire had been built up properly for the first time, and a man was singing, badly, hoarsely, half remembering the words of some marching song from a war that was over. It was a wretched sound. It was the most hopeful thing she had heard in 5 days. Eleanor of Ravensmore, banished wife, mistress now of a cursed and crumbling hold at the end of the kingdom, stood on the wall through the first watch of the night, and began, very quietly, to plan. Dawn came to Greywater, the colour of cold ash, the sun lifting somewhere behind the fells, but never quite clearing them, so that the light in the bailey was grey before it was gold. Eleanor had not slept. She had sat the first watch, and most of the second on the wall walk, and when she came down at last her legs were stiff with cold, despite the promise of heat already gathering in the throat of the pass, and her good indigo wool was stiff, with the dust of 5 days. She found Halloran in the gateway with his horse saddled, and the 6 clean men of the escort drawn up behind him, blinking in the half-light, eager as men are eager to put a cursed place at their backs. My lady. He had shaved, somehow, scraped his jaw clean with cold iron water, as though he meant to ride south looking like a soldier of the duchy, and not a man fleeing a tomb. We'll make the wheat country by nightfall, if the high wells hold. I've left you what we could spare, 3 sacks of meal off the pack mule, and a wheel of hard cheese, and my second sword, because the one on that captain's hip hasn't been drawn since the old king's reign by the look of it. You have given me more than the Duke did, she said. He gave me a road and told me to mind the heat. The old sergeant looked at the cobbles. A crow dropped from the broken tower and crossed the bailey low, and the men flinched as one, all 6, and were ashamed, and Halloran did not flinch at all, because he had set his mind to other things. You're certain, my lady, there's still room behind my saddle? I am certain. She put her hand on his horse's neck. The beast was warm and real, and smelled of honest sweat, and she held on to that. Ride safe, Halloran, and remember what I asked. Not a word of me. Not how I looked, not what I said, not whether I wept on the road. Let my husband have the whole silence of the marches for his answer. It's a cruel gift to give a man. He gathered his reins. He gave me a cruel one first. She stepped back. Go. He went. She climbed to the wall walk to watch them down the dry track, 7 small figures dwindling along the brown shoulder of the fell until the heat shimmer took them, and they were gone, and the dust of their going hung gold in the slanting light, and then settled, and there was nothing on the southern road at all, only the empty land and the iron smell of the morning, and, behind her, threading down out of the broken tower, the thin keening of the fell wind that the men believed was a curse. She stood and let herself feel it, the whole weight of the empty country closing around her. The last friendly face gone south. Then she turned her back on the road and looked down into the bailey, where 40 ruined men were beginning, slowly, to wake and remember that someone had told them to stand. "Captain Brennan," she called down. "Where do you take your water?" By full morning the heat had come into the bailey like a hand pressing flat, and Eleanor had her answer, and it sickened her. They took their water from a cistern sunk in the rock at the foot of the broken tower, a black mouth of standing green, scummed at the edges, breeding its own small flies, and beside it, a windlass, with a rope gone furry with rot. She stood over it with her sleeve across her mouth, and Brennan beside her, swaying a little on his feet though the sun was barely high, his breath sour, his eyes red-rimmed and amused. "Cursed water," he said comfortably. "Runs bitter, like everything here. You'll not change it, my lady." 3 commanders tried. Captain Voss had the men dig a fresh well by the south wall, struck rock at 6 feet and gave it up. Captain Aldous sent to the Duke for an engineer, and the engineer took one look at the place and was on the road south by morning. He laughed his ruined laugh. Aldous didn't last the autumn after that. None of them lasted. The hold takes the heart out of a man, and then it takes the rest. "How?" Eleanor said. "How what, my lady? How did they come to grief?" "You speak of 3 commanders gone in 3 seasons as though it were weather. Tell me how." "Voss, Aldous. The third. What was his name?" Something shifted behind Brennan's red eyes, a wariness surfacing through the ruin. "Marlowe, Captain Marlowe." He looked away, up at the jagged tower against the white sky. "Voss went off the north wall in the dark. Walking the watch," they said, and the curse took him over the edge. Aldous wasted, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, sat up listening to that. He jerked his chin at the keening. "Marlowe rode out one night into the pass and didn't come back, and we found his horse 3 days later, with the saddle empty. That's how Greywater unmakes you, my lady. One way or another. You'd do better to let the gate stand open, and the men lie soft, and trouble nothing. Trouble nothing, and the hold leaves you be. The gate stays shut." She turned from the foul cistern. "And the men do not lie soft. There is a stream in the gully below the east wall. I crossed it riding in. Low, but running, and running water does not breed this." She pointed at the green scum. "From this hour every man fit to carry a yoke carries water up from the gully twice a day, and this pit is drained and limed, and we see what is at the bottom of it. Where are your stores of lime? A keep this old will have lime." Brennan's amusement curdled. "You'll work them in this heat? They'll not do it. They've forgotten how to be ordered, my lady. I'm telling you for your own good. They'll smile at you and do nothing, and you'll wear yourself to a thread against them, and then one morning you'll understand, the way I understood, that there's no point to any of it, and you'll let the gate swing open again and lie down in the sun like the rest of us. That's the curse. It isn't ghosts, it's understanding." It was, she thought, the truest thing the ruined man had said, and the most dangerous. She looked at him a long moment, at the captain's sash gone the colour of dishwater across his chest, and she understood that he was not cruel, and not even wholly her enemy. He was a warning of what waited for her if she failed. "You may be right, Captain," she said. "We will find out. But you will not unmake my orders by smiling, and you will not lie in the sun while I drain this pit, because if you do, the men will watch you and learn that orders here are a kind of joke. So you will take up the first yoke yourself." She held his red gaze and did not blink. "And the men will watch you do it. That is how we begin." A wry voice spoke up from the shade of the gatehouse, where an old man sat plucking a thin hen, the cook, she would learn, a leathery relic called Maddox, who had outlasted 4 commanders by the simple method of being too sour to unmake. "Begging the lady's pardon," he said, not looking up from the hen, "but I've not seen the captain carry so much as his own dinner in a 12-month. This I'll stay awake for." A sound went through the watching men, not a laugh. They had forgotten laughter, but the ragged ancestor of one, a loosening. Brennan's jaw worked. The whole bailey hung on it in the hammering heat, the flies droning over the green water, and Eleanor stood with her chin up and her ruined gown and her borrowed sword, and waited to learn whether she commanded anything at all. Brennan picked up the yoke. He did it with a curse and a sneer, and he did it badly, slopping half the first load down his own leg as he came staggering up from the gully. And the men did not cheer, because they had nothing left to cheer with. But they watched. Every one of them watched. And when the captain had made his second trip a young soldier, with a burn scar pulling one eye half-shut spat on his hands, and took up the next yoke, without being told. And then there were 2 of them on the path. And then 4. By the worst heat of the afternoon there was a line of them going down to the gully and coming up streaming and grey-faced, and the foul cistern was sinking inch by inch toward its secrets, and Eleanor worked the windlass herself until her palms blistered and split, because she had understood that here she could order nothing she would not first do. It was the burn-scarred lad, Wat, the others called him, who found the first wrongness, and he found it at the bottom of the cistern. They had drained it by evening to a black sucking ooze, and Wat went down on a rope with a rushlight to clear the silt from the rock spring that fed it. And he came up too fast, hauling on the line, his half-shut eye wide, and the whole of him shaking. "There's a grate," he said. "Down at the bottom, my lady, set in the rock where the spring comes through, an iron grate. And it's—" Somebody's stopped it. Packed it. "There's wool and pitch, and old sacking rammed in behind the bars, so the good spring water can't come through, but a trickle, and what stands in the pit goes foul for want of moving." He swallowed. "It's not old work. The pitch is still soft." Eleanor went down herself. Brennan called it madness. She went anyway, skirts knotted up out of the muck, the rope burning her split palms, down into the cool, stinking dark, where the rushlight guttered and the rock wept around her. And it was as the boy had said. The spring came clean and cold out of a cleft in the living rock, the way it must have come for 1,000 years to feed a fortress, and someone had set their will against it. The iron grate was crammed and corked, deliberate, patient work, the pitch laid on in layers over weeks, so that the men of Greywater drank standing rot and called it a curse, and lost their hearts to it season by season, and never once thought to ask whether the bitter water had a hand behind it. She tore the packing free with her own fingers in the dark, sacking and tarred wool coming away in foul handfuls, and far above her she heard Watts shout as the water began to move, heard the answering sound run round the bailey as the cistern's level checked, and then, impossibly, began to rise clean and cold. She came up into the last red light streaming through the broken tooth of the tower, with pitch under her nails and her gown ruined past saving, and she stood streaming in the gateway and looked at the 40 faces turned toward her, and at Brennan's among them gone grey and strange. "There is no curse on your water," she said. "There is a man's hand on your water. Patient, practiced, working in the dark, over months, to make this place into exactly what every soul in the kingdom already believed it was, a hold that unmakes the men sent to hold it." She let that settle. Captain Voss, Captain Aldous, Captain Marlowe, 3 commanders gone in 3 seasons, and a fortress that guards the one road the enemy must take, and a well stopped by hand so the garrison drinks despair. Her voice rang off the black stone. "I came here believing I had been sent to a cursed place. I begin to think I have been sent to a guarded one, guarded against the kingdom, by someone who wants this gate to stand open, and I should very much like to meet him." No one answered. But that night the keening came down out of the broken tower as it always did, thin and high on the warm wind, and for the first time Eleanor did not hear a curse in it. She heard a sound that someone had use for. She climbed the tower the next morning, against every man's counsel, before the heat was up. The stair was a ruin, half its steps gone to a fall of black rubble, and the upper chamber where the floor still held was open to the sky on its broken side, the wind pouring through, and there it was, the keening, made plain. A war horn of old grey metal, cracked along its length, had been wedged mouth outward into a gap in the stones, lashed fast with wire, angled so the fell wind tearing through the pass played across its broken mouth and drew out that thin, unending wail that had hollowed the hearts of 4 garrisons. It was nothing. It was a trick a clever boy might work. And it had been set there by no boy. The wire was good wire, the lashing soldier's work, and around it on the gritty floor, sheltered under the leaning wall, lay the rest of it. A lantern, shuttered, the horn panes smoked. A coil of cord. A folded square of oiled cloth, and inside it, dry and waiting. A fold of dark hooding to mask the lantern's light to a single, narrow beam. The ash of small fires, days old and days older, layered and scratched into the soot on the leaning stone, where a man might stand night after night and have nothing to do with his hands while he waited. Tally marks. Scores of them. Counting something. Counting nights, or counting answers, from somewhere out across the Black Pass, where the enemy country began. Eleanor crouched over the lantern in the wind, with her heart going hard and slow. Someone in this hold, someone who had been here through 3 commanders and was here still, climbed this tower in the dark and showed a masked light north into the pass, and the keening horn kept the frightened garrison from ever climbing up to see it done. The forged letters in her own hand, sealed with her own ring, taken on a man riding for the enemy line. A baron the king watched with narrowed eyes, and now a signal fire at the very mouth of the road into the kingdom, tended patiently while a fortress was made to rot from within. It was all one hand. She did not yet know the face of it, but it was all one hand, and that hand had reached from the high gallery at Ravenscourt, where her husband had cast her out, all the way to this broken tower at the end of the world, and she had been the chaff thrown up to hide the grain. "My lady." Watt's voice, small from the head of the broken stair. He had come up after her, brave past his fear. "What is it? What's up here?" "Proof," she said. She gathered the lantern, the cord, the oiled cloth, the masking hood into her ruined skirt, careful as a woman gathering eggs. "Proof that I am not the only liar's tool in this story, Watt. Say nothing. Not to the captain, not to your own pillow. Someone here climbs to this room, and I do not yet know his name, and until I do, he must believe his curse is working." She looked at the tally marks scored deep in the soot. "And he must believe I am too busy with the water to look up." It was 3 days later, with the cistern run sweet, and the gate barred each dusk, and the men beginning, barely, grudgingly, to walk like soldiers again, that the South Road gave up a rider. He came alone in the white blaze of midday, on a blown horse, in the dust-grey livery of a ducal courier, and he carried a packet sealed with the raven and the broken tower. Eleanor took it on the wall above the gate, so the whole bailey might see that messages came to Greywater, as to any garrison of the duchy, that they were not forgotten, not wholly cast off. She broke the seal with her thumb where she stood, in the heat, with the courier's horse blowing below, and the men watching, and she read. The orders were brief, and they were cold. The escort of 6 guardsmen and Sergeant Halloran, already gone south, though the writer plainly did not know it, were recalled at once to Ravenscourt. The Lady Eleanor's household allowance was reduced by half against the disordered state of the realm's finances. The garrison of Greywater was to be held at its present strength, and on no account reinforced, the hold being of no present strategic worth. It was signed with the Duke's name. It bore the Duke's seal. And it was not the Duke's hand. Eleanor stood very still on the hot stone and read it again, and the bailey, and the heat, and the courier's blowing horse, all drew away to a great distance, because she knew Julian's hand the way she knew his step on the gallery floor, knew the hard downstroke of his J, the way he crossed his letters as though striking something out, the impatience of him in every line. She had 2 years of his terse notes, folded in the bottom of her trunk. And this was beautiful. This was patient. The hand that had written here had studied Julian's writing, and copied it with the loving care of a forger, and got it almost perfect, perfect enough for a clerk, perfect enough for the king's own court, but not perfect enough for the woman who had loved the man behind it. It was the same hand, she would have wagered her soul on it, that had written letters to Lord Carrow's house, and sealed them with a ring that was not its own, and tucked them into a saddlebag to ruin her. "Bad news, my lady?" The courier called up, uneasy under her stillness. "News," she said, "that has told me a great deal more than its writer intended." She folded the false orders along their false creases. "Who gave you this packet?" "At Ravenscourt. Whose hand put it into yours?" The man scratched under his helm. "The steward of the chamber, my lady." "As always." "Master," he caught himself, glanced at the gate, lowered his voice though there was no one near him in all that empty land. "Master Crail, him that keeps the Duke's correspondence and pours at his table, has done these 3 years. 3 years. Voss, Aldous, Marlowe, 3 commanders in 3 seasons. A man at the Duke's elbow these 3 years, who kept his correspondence, who could copy a hand and lift a seal and slide a packet of ruin into a courier's bag, and who had, perhaps, a second man in this very hold climbing a broken tower to show a light north." Eleanor's hand closed on the folded parchment until the wax cracked. "Master Crail," she said softly, "I shall remember it." She did not yet know the worst of it, that the false orders forbidding reinforcement were not idle cruelty but careful preparation, clearing the board before a stroke already in motion. She learned that part at dusk. The horn from the pass came as the light failed, not the keening of the broken war horn above her, but a true horn, deep and answered, sounding once from the black throat of the fells, and then again, nearer. What reached the wall walk first, and then Eleanor, and Brennan after her, with his sword drawn at last, and his face for once entirely awake, and they stood together looking north into the dimming pass, where the heat of the day still shimmered off the rock. And there was dust on the high track. A great deal of dust, hanging gold in the last light, the kind that is raised not by a probe of a dozen raiders come to test a closed gate, but by a column, by horses and men in numbers, moving down out of the enemy country toward the one road into the kingdom, toward a fortress they had been promised would be rotten, ungarrisoned, blind, its well stopped and its men unmade, and its gate left hanging open like the mouth of something asleep. Sweet mercy, what whispered? The same words the boy had whispered 5 days ago at the sight of the hold, and this time no one shamed him for it. Brennan turned to her, and all the ruin had gone out of his face, leaving something older and more frightened underneath. "My lady, we are 40 men, and half of those forgot how to hold a wall a year ago, and there's no help coming. You read it yourself. No reinforcement. The Duke's own order. The Duke's order was a lie," Eleanor said. She did not take her eyes from the gold dust rising in the dark pass, from the deep horn sounding a third time closer. Her split palms ached on the cold stone. "Every part of this place has been made ready for this night by a patient hand. The water, the curse, the open gate, the men with their hearts taken out, the order that strips us bare and forbids us aid. Someone has spent 3 years and 3 commanders building a door into the kingdom, and tonight they mean to walk through it." She drew Halloran's second sword, and the worn blade caught the last red light. "So we are going to disappoint them." "What? The gully gate? The lower postern? Is it barred?" I don't know, my lady." "Then find out. And bar it. And run." She turned on the wall, and her voice went out over the waking, frightened Bailey, clear and cold and carrying, as it had carried on her first hour in this place. "Up. All of you, up and to the walls. The curse is broken, and the water runs sweet, and tonight we find out what 40 men are worth when somebody has remembered to tell them they are men. Maddox, every lamp we own to the gatehouse. Brennan, with me. And then, lower, only for the grey-faced captain at her side. As the horn sounded a 4th time, and the dust came on down the darkening pass, you told me the hold unmakes whoever holds it. Let us find out tonight whether it can be held." Brennan looked at her for a long moment in the failing light, and then he laughed, not the ruined cackle she had heard on her first hour at the gate, but something shorter and harder, a sound with a man's weight behind it. "Held," he said. "God help me. I'd half forgot the word." He turned and bellowed it down into the bailey, and his voice cracked on the first try and held on the second, and that was Greywater all over. Broken, then holding. To the walls, you idle dogs. To the walls, or by morning you'll wish the curse had taken you soft in your sleep. They came. Slowly, stumbling, half of them still shaking the long stupor out of their limbs. But they came, snatching up rusted pikes and bills from the armory Eleanor had made them scour 2 days past, jamming caps over matted hair, and the bailey that had lain like a flood rack for a year began, in the blue dusk, to move with purpose. Eleanor went down among them with Halloran's sword bare in her blistered hand, and gave her orders short and plain, because she had learned in 5 days that frightened men cannot hold a long sentence in their heads. You and you, the gatehouse. Bar the wicket, drop the beam, and pile every stone you can lift behind it. A burn-scarred face swam up before her. What? The lower postern by the gully? Is it barred? Barred and braced, my lady. I did it myself, and I drove a wedge under it besides. His voice climbed thin and high. But the wood's old. It's that old. If they bring iron to it, then we hold the wall above it so they never bring iron to it. Maddox. She turned, and the old cook was already there at her elbow, his leather face entirely calm, a long carving knife thrust through his belt, and an armful of lamps clutched to his chest like a man bringing kindling to a hearth. Every light we own to the gatehouse, and oil, and the brazier lit. I want that gate as bright as noon when they come to it. Men fight what they can see. They lose their nerve at what they cannot. There's a wisdom in that, Maddox allowed, squinting up at her over the lamps. 4 commanders I cooked for, and not one of them thought a hungry man fights better by lamplight than by dark. They thought a great deal, those 4. Pity it never kept them breathing. He shuffled off toward the gatehouse, and the dry little remark trailed behind him like smoke, and Eleanor, God forgive her, felt the corner of her mouth tug, because in all that gathering dread the sour old creature was the one steady thing in the yard. She would remember that. Later, she would remember exactly how he had made her want to smile. The dust came on down the pass. By the time full dark settled over the fells the enemy had closed to within a half-mile, and she could hear them, the jingle and thud of a column on the move, the snort of horses, a voice calling a halt in a tongue she did not know, harsh and carrying off the black rock. They were not hurrying. That was the thing that turned her stomach cold. They came at a walk, unworried, the way a man walks up to a house he has already been given the key to. They think the door's open, Brennan muttered beside her on the wall. He had found a breastplate from somewhere, and a helm gone green at the rivets, and he looked almost a soldier again. They've been told it's open. Look at them. No shields up, no scouts out. They're not coming to storm a wall. They're coming to walk into a ruin and find it warm for them. Good, said Eleanor. He stared at her. Good, my lady? A man who expects an open door does not bring a battering ram. She watched the torches kindle one by one along the dark mass below, a slow constellation in the throat of the pass, and the warm fell wind brought her the smell of them. Horse and pitch torch, and the rank closeness of many men, and under it the iron tang of the night. They have come light, and they have come certain. We are 40, and broken, and they are many, and whole. But they do not yet know that anything in this place has changed. That is the only advantage we hold, and we hold it for as long as we can make them believe the curse still binds. She raised her voice along the wall, low and fierce. No man shows himself above the parapet. No man calls out. Let them come right up under us thinking the hold is a corpse. And when I give the word, only when I give it, we teach them otherwise. The torches massed and steadied and began, at last, to come on. He rode out ahead of them, the man who led them, a big rider on a pale horse, bareheaded, a torch lifted high in one fist, so that the gate lamps and his own flame lit him gold against the dark. He drew rein a stone's throw from the wall, and looked up at the bright gatehouse and the dead, seeming battlements, and he called out in the common tongue of the border, accented, but clear. "Greywater, open your gate." He let the pale horse step closer, fearless, contemptuous. "We know what you are. We know your well is foul, and your men are unmanned, and your lord has thrown you away. There is no shame in it. Open the gate and stand aside, and not a hair of your heads need come to harm. You were forgotten by your own. Be remembered by us. Open, and live." Along the dark wall, unseen 40 men held their breath, and Eleanor felt the whole night balance on the edge of a knife. She knew what he was doing. He was offering them the very thing the curse had taught them to want: to lie down, to stop minding, to let the gates swing wide and trouble nothing. Half of them had wanted exactly that a week ago. She did not dare look to see whether any wanted it still. She rose up alone into the lamplight above the gate, in her ruined indigo gown with her hair come loose about a face streaked grey with the pitch of the well, and she looked down at him. "You have been misinformed, sir," she said. The pale horse shied at the sound of a woman's voice from a dead wall. The rider mastered it and stared up at her, and something in his certainty flickered. "Who are you, the woman who pulled the rag out of your well 3 days ago?" She set her blistered hands flat on the warm stone so he could see them, black to the wrist. "You were promised a rotten gate, a blind garrison, a hold that would open itself like a flower. Somebody took your good coin for it. I am here to tell you that you have been cheated, and that the cheat has cost you, and that the gate of Greywater stands barred tonight for the first time in 3 years. She straightened. "Go home, sir, or stay, and learn the price of believing a liar. It is the lesson the whole of my last fortnight has taught me, and I find I have a great deal of it to pass on." For a heartbeat, the pass was utterly still. Then the rider flung down his torch, so that it guttered and rolled in the dust, and wheeled the pale horse, and shouted a word into the dark, and the whole gold constellation of the enemy line surged forward at once, with a roar that came up off the rock and broke against the wall like surf. "Now," said Eleanor, very quietly, and then she screamed it. "Now." The wall came alive. 40 men who had lain a year in the sun rose up together into the lamplight and the night, and the first ragged volley of stones and quarrels and Maddox's lamp oil went down into the packed mass at the gate, and the certainty of the men below shattered against it. They had brought no shields up. They had come to walk into a ruin. The oil caught from the brazier fire and ran flaming down the slope before the gate, and the screaming changed its note entirely, and Eleanor stood in the full glare of it with her sword lifted and her voice raw, calling the throws, calling the line, and beneath her the gate shuddered under the first bodies flung against it, and held. It held, for an hour, in the hammering dark, against everything the pass could throw at it. The gate of Greywater held, and Eleanor began, against all sense, to believe. It was the noise that warned her, not the noise at the gate. That was a single vast continuous roar she had stopped hearing the way one stops hearing a river. It was a different sound, behind her and below. That snagged at the edge of her ear, the way the keening had snagged at it on the road. A splintering, a thin shriek of old wood, faint under the battle, from down where the bailey ran into shadow at the foot of the broken tower, from the gully side. From the lower postern, what had Switu her, he had barred and braced and driven a wedge beneath. She turned from the gate fight, with her heart gone wrong in her chest, and she looked down into the dark of the bailey, and she saw the light. It was up in the broken tower. A single narrow beam, hooded and cold, swinging slowly north over the wall into the black pass, and then, as she watched, 3 short blinks, a pause, 3 more. Not the keening horn this time. The lantern, the masked lantern she had carried down in her ruined skirt 3 days past, and locked, with her own hands, in the one sound chest in her own chamber. Someone had opened that chest. Someone was up in the tower now, in the middle of the battle, showing the enemy where the wall was thinnest and the postern weakest, telling them in patient blinks of cold light exactly where to break in. "Brennan," She caught his arm. He spun, sword red to the hilt, his face a stranger's in the firelight. The tower. The lower postern. They're inside the gully. Someone's signaling them in. Hold the gate. Hold it whatever it costs. The gate is nothing if they're behind us. My lady, you can't go down there alone. Hold the gate. She was already gone, down the worn wall stair 2 at a time, Halloran's sword in her fist, into the dark below, where the lamplight from the gatehouse did not reach. The bailey was a country of shadows. She ran through it with the battle a red glare at her back, and the broken tower a black tooth ahead, and as she came past the drained cistern, a shape lurched out of the dark at her, and she near ran herself through with her own blade before she saw the burned, scarred face. What? She caught him. The boy was white, gasping. Blood. She would not name it so even in her own head. She made it only dark and wet, soaking one sleeve from a gash along his forearm. What? The postern. It's stove in, my lady. His teeth were chattering, though the night was warm. I went down when I heard it go. There's men in the gully, in the dark. 3, 4. They've got iron bars and they had the wedge out already, my lady. The wedge I drove. It was out before they ever set bar to the wood. Somebody'd drawn it from the inside. His half-shut eye found hers, huge with the horror of it. Somebody opened it for them. Somebody in the hold pulled my wedge and let them at the wood. How many are through? None yet. I jammed it again. I put my shoulder to it, and a man helped me. An old man. He came down with a knife and helped me brace it and told me to run for you, Watts Wade. Maddox. Maddox came down and held the postern with me and sent me to fetch you. He's down there now alone, with his carving knife holding the door. My lady, you have to. The world went very quiet and very clear. Maddox. The old cook who had outlasted 4 commanders by being too sour to unmake. Maddox, who had been at Greywater longer than any soul living, through Voss and Aldous and Marlowe, 3 commanders gone in 3 seasons, while one leathery man went on plucking hens in the gatehouse shade. Maddox, who had brought every lamp in the hold to the gate with his own hands not 1 hour past. Every lamp, so that the bailey behind would lie in perfect dark while a cold beam swung north from the tower. Maddox, who had made her want to smile. What? She said, and her voice was not her own. When you came on the postern. The light in the tower. Was it showing before you went down, or after? The boy blinked at her, not understanding. After, my lady. It started after. I came up out of the gully, and I looked back, and there it was, up top, swinging. He swallowed. Maddox said it must be one of the enemy got up there. He said to tell you to look to the tower while he held the door. Yes, Eleanor said softly. I am sure he did. She turned from the boy and looked up at the broken tower, where the cold beam still swung its patient signal north into the dark. 3, and 3, and 3, and she understood the whole shape of it at last. The way one understands the shape of a room when the lamp is finally brought in. That the hand which had stopped the well and hung the keening horn and tended the fire through 3 murdered seasons was not out across the pass in the enemy country at all. It had been here the whole while. It had carried her lamps to the gate. It had stood at her elbow and made the dry little jokes that kept her steady, and it had sent the one boy brave enough to climb the tower down into the gully on a lie, so that nobody would go up the broken stair while the signal burned. Stay here, she told Watt. Bar yourself in the gatehouse with Brennan. If I do not come down, tell him everything I have told you, and tell him the cook is the curse, and let him do what soldiers do. She tightened her grip on the sword. I am going up. My lady, your hands, the boy began, and then she was already climbing. The broken stair was worse in the dark and the heat than it had been by day. The fallen rubble shifted under her boots. The wind poured down through the gaps in the wall thick with the smell of the pass, pitch and horse, and the green stink of the gully below. And over all of it now, the wet copper reek of a fight. Twice she went to her knees on the slick stone, and put her ruined palms down on the grit, and bit back the cry of it, and climbed on, up out of the noise of the gate, up toward the cold light. Below and behind her the battle roared and flickered. Ahead, the narrow beam swung and blinked. Swung and blinked. Indifferent. Methodical. 3, and 3, and 3. She came up through the broken floor, into the open chamber where the sky showed through the leaning wall, and there he was. Maddox stood with his back half to her, at the gap in the stones, the masked lantern in his 2 hands, working its hood with the easy patience of a man who has done a thing 10,000 times. His carving knife lay on the gritty floor beside him, clean. He was not holding any postern. He had never gone near the gully. He was humming, very low, under the wind, the same hoarse marching song the soldier had half remembered her first night, when she had thought it the most hopeful sound in 5 days. "You will want to set the lantern down, Maddox," Eleanor said. He did not start. He did not even turn at once. He finished the count he was on, 3 slow blinks, a pause, and only then did he lower the hood and let the beam go dark, and turn, and look at her across the wind-scoured chamber, his leather face entirely calm in the faint glow of the battle leaking up through the floor. "Now that's a shame," he said. "I did rather hope the boy would keep you at the gate a while longer. He's a good boy. Brave, too brave by half. That's what killed the others. You know, the brave ones. Voss went up this very stair, after this very light. The brave fool. On a black night, much like this one." He clicked his tongue. "Long way down off the north wall. From here. Terrible accident. The curse," everyone said. "You stopped the well." Her voice came out level, and she was distantly amazed at it. "You hung the horn. You sent Watt down into the gully on a lie. 3 years. 3 commanders." She made herself say the rest. "And the lamps. You carried every lamp in the hold to the gate tonight with your own hands, so the bailey would be dark behind us while you climbed up here. A man likes his work tidy." Maddox set the lantern down on the leaning stone, gently, beside the tally marks scored deep in the soot. His tally marks, 3 years of them, counting the nights, counting the answers from across the pass. "You've been a great trouble to me, my lady, and I'll own I didn't see it coming. 40 broken men, and a thrown-away wife. Master Crail wrote me you'd be no trouble at all. A spoilt court lady, he wrote, who'll weep in her chamber and trouble nothing." The old eyes glittered. "He's a clever man, Crail, but he's never once in his life had to manage anyone he couldn't bribe or frighten, and I don't think he reckoned on the one you can't do either of those two. The one who's already lost the lot. You said it yourself that first hour. I heard you. Nothing left to take, so nothing left to fear." He shook his head, almost fond. "I should have stopped your well twice over the night you rode in." Crail, she held to the name like a handhold on the broken stair. "Master Crail, who keeps the Duke's correspondence. Who copied my hand to Lord Carrow and sealed it with a ring that was not mine. Who wrote the orders today in my husband's hand to forbid you reinforcement." The pieces seated themselves one by one, cold and certain. "You are his man here. You have been his man here for 3 years, opening this door a crack at a time, and tonight you mean to open it wide. Tonight it's opened, my lady." Maddox glanced, almost regretful, toward the dark pass, or it would be, if you'd been a slower climber. They're in the gully wanting only the word that the postern's clear. One more signal and they're up the wedge Watt braced and into your bailey from behind, while every man you've got is screaming at the front gate. He spread his empty hands. "It's not personal. You seem a fine enough lady, but there's a road into the kingdom under this rock, and a great many people on the far side of the fells have paid a very great deal of money to be sure it stays open, and you're standing on it." He bent for the lantern. "Don't," Eleanor said. "Or what?" He smiled at her, gentle, terrible, and lifted the masked light. And his thumb found the hood. "You'll run an old cook through? You've never cut anything in your life but your meat at table, my lady. I've watched you a fortnight. You blistered your own hands sooner than order it done. You haven't got it in, She did not let him finish, because she had learned, this fortnight, that a frightened person cannot hold a long sentence in their head, and that she herself was very frightened indeed. She crossed the chamber in 3 strides over the shifting rubble, and struck the lantern from his hands with the flat of Halloran's sword, and it spun away and smashed against the leaning stone, and the cold beam died in a scatter of horn and oil. And Maddox was faster than any leather-faced old cook had a right to be. The carving knife was up off the floor, and in his fist between one breath and the next, and he came at her low and certain with 3 commanders' worth of practice behind it. They closed in the dark, in the wind, on the broken floor above the burning gate. He was old, and she was spent, her palms split and slick, her arm leaden from an hour of calling the wall, but she was taller, and she had reach, and she had Halloran's good blade against a kitchen knife. And behind everything she had, the thing he had named himself, and could not take back, she had nothing left in all the world that he could threaten her with. He fought to open a door. She fought because the door must not open. She turned his first thrust on the cross of her guard, and felt the jar of it run up to her shoulder. She gave ground over the rubble and nearly went down, and did not. And when his hand closed on the wreck of her sleeve and hauled her toward the gap in the wall, toward the long black drop where Voss had gone, she let him pull, and turned with the pull instead of against it the way Halloran had taught her to turn a horse, and put the old man's own weight and her shoulder together, and sent him past her. His boot found the loose stone at the lip of the gap. The wind took the rest. There was a sound, short and final, and then only the wind, and the battle, and Eleanor on her knees on the broken floor, with her ruined hands flat on the cold soot, and the tally marks of 3 murdered years scored under her fingers, shaking, whole, alone in the tower. She did not let herself kneel there long. Below her the gate still roared, and the enemy still waited in the gully for a signal that would not come now, and that, she understood, climbing to her feet with the wind tearing at her, was the very thing she could turn against them. They were waiting for a light. They did not yet know their man in the tower was gone. If she gave them a false one, if she sent them the signal that the postern was clear when it was not, she could draw the whole of that gully force up against a braced door and a waiting wall, and break them on it. She salvaged what she could of the smashed lantern, the hood half melted, one hornpane cracked but whole, and she struck a light from the tinder in the oiled cloth with hands that would barely close, and she leaned out into the black mouth of the pass and showed the enemy the cold beam they had paid 3 years for. 3 blinks. A pause. 3 more. Come up. The way is clear. Come and take your open door. Then she ran for the stair, and the gate, and the gully wall, shouting Brennan's name into the dark before she had even reached the bailey, because she had perhaps 100 heartbeats to set a trap before the men below the wall came swarming up the wedge that Watt had braced, believing themselves expected, believing the curse had kept its bargain, and the only soul in all of Greywater who knew the truth of any of it was a banished wife with shredded hands and a borrowed sword, standing alone at the bottom of the kingdom, the night not half over, the column at the front gate undiminished, and the worst of it, she felt it settle in her chest cold and sure as she came down into the firelight, still to come. For if Maddox had been Creel's hand here, and Creel sat even now at her husband's elbow pouring his wine, then this attack on a forgotten hold was never the whole of the plot. It was the door. And somewhere south, beyond 5 days of dry road, the men who had built that door so carefully meant to walk a great deal further through it than one cursed keep at the end of the world. And Julian, who had thrown her away on their forged word, would never see the hand that reached for him, because he had sent away the one soul living who had learned to read its writing. "Brennan!" She screamed into the glare. "The gully wall! Every man you can spare! They're coming up the postern, and I want them to. Now! Brennan! Now!" The gully wall was lower than the gate, old and crumbling, and the men who reached it came in a half-crouch out of the dark below, sure of their welcome. Eleanor saw them through the gaps in the parapet, as she came tearing down off the stair, shapes rising up the braced postern in the green stink of the gully, hand over hand, hauling at the wedge Watt had driven. The wedge that her false signal had told them was already drawn. They had seen the cold light blink 3 and 3 from the broken tower. They believed the man in the high room had kept his bargain. They believed the curse still held. Down. She breathed at the dozen men Brennan had peeled off the gate, pushing them flat behind the broken stone with her own bleeding hands. Let them come over. Let them set their feet on our side before you so much as breathe. They think we are corpses. Be corpses 1 moment longer. The first of the climbers got his elbows over the parapet and grinned in the dark. A young man with a torch, scarred jaw, and he looked along the wall walk at the dozen still shapes and took them for the slain. He swung his leg across. He opened his mouth to call the rest up. Now, said Eleanor. They rose. The young man's grin was still on his face when Brennan took him by the collar and the belt and pitched him back into the gully on top of the men climbing behind, and then the whole short stretch of wall was a churn of bills and pike butts and falling bodies, and the certainty went out of the enemy below in a single ragged scream of confusion. Men who had come to walk through an open door finding it slammed and bristling. They could not get up the wedge with their own people falling on them. They could not see in the dark how few held the wall. They broke off the postern and milled in the gully, and the warm fell wind carried up the sound of an army that has lost the one thing it was promised, surprise, and does not know what else it has lost with it. The oil, Eleanor called. Maddox's lamp oil, what's left of it, down the gully, and a torch after. Not to burn them, to show them. Let them see how thin we are and run, or let them see and stay and break their teeth on it. Either serves. A jar went over, and a brand spun after it, and the gully bloomed orange, and in that light the men below at last saw the truth of Greywater. Not a tomb, but a wall held by waking men, and a woman in a ruined indigo gown standing tall in the firelight with a sword in her shredded hand, calling the line. They ran, first in ones, then in a flood, back up the gully into the dark of the pass, and the deep horn that had sounded so certain 4 times now sounded twice, broken, calling the column off the front gate too, and the gold constellation of torches that had pressed against the hold for an hour wavered, drew apart, and began to stream north into the throat of the fells the way it had come. They're going. Brennan stood swaying against the parapet, his green riveted helm gone, a long shallow hurt across his brow he had not yet noticed. My lady, they're going. We held it. He said the word as though it were in a foreign tongue, the way he had said it on the wall before the first horn. We held the gate. You held the gate. Eleanor lowered the sword at last, and her arm shook so that the point dragged in the grit. I only reminded you that you knew how. Dawn came up grey behind the fells, and then, for the first time in 5 days, gold, true gold, spilling over the high ridge into the throat of the pass, and down into a bailey that was no longer a flood rack of broken men. They had set their own watch without being told. Someone had got the cook fire going properly, and at that thought Eleanor's chest went tight and cold, because the man who had tended that fire for 3 murdered seasons was no longer in the world to tend it, and she had been the one to send him out of it. She told them the truth on the wall walk in the first clean light, all of them gathered below in the gold and the long blue shadow of the broken tower. Because she had learned in a fortnight that men who are lied to lose their hearts, and these had only just got theirs back. There was no curse on Greywater, she said. There was a man, one of your own. He stopped your well with his own hands and hung the horn that wailed in the night and showed a cold light north to the enemy across the pass, season after season, and 3 good commanders came to grief because they went looking for a ghost and never thought to look for a cook. A sound went through them, low and terrible. Maddox served a man called Crail, who sits at the Duke's right hand 5 days south and pours his wine. Crail forged the letters that ruined me and sent me here for chaff, to hide his grain. And last night, when the door he had spent 3 years building was meant at last to open, an old man went up that tower to swing the light one final time, and he did not come down. She let it stand plain. She would not dress it. I went up after him. Only one of us came down. I will carry that to the end of my days, and I will not pretend to you it sits easy. But the door is shut, and the men who paid for it are running north with the morning behind them. Watt, white-faced, his arm bound in a strip of someone's shirt, was the first to find his voice. Then it's over, my lady. We won. They're gone. They are gone from here. She looked north, where the dust of the broken column still hung faint over the high track. But a door this carefully built was never meant to let one raiding column through. What? Hear me, all of you. She turned to face the gold-lit bailey. Why stop a well 3 years to open one cursed keep at the end of the kingdom? Because this is the gate. Beyond this pass the land runs soft and open all the way to the heart of the realm. And there is a baron in the east the king watches with narrowed eyes, and a man at the duke's elbow with a gift for other men's handwriting. This was the door. What comes through a door is the whole of the army behind it. And every soul south of these fells believes Greywater is a ruin that fell in the night, believes it because the man who built the lie made certain they would. Her voice dropped, and they leaned to catch it. No one is coming to relieve us. No one even knows there was a battle. The kingdom is blind, and the only eyes that can see are 40 men at the bottom of the world, and a wife everyone south of here believes is weeping in her chamber. Brennan wiped the hurt from his brow at last, and looked at his reddened hand as though surprised by it. Then what would you have us do, my lady? We've held the door. We can't hold the whole kingdom with 40 men. No, she smiled then, and it was not a gentle thing. So we are not going to hold. We are going to ride. They brought her the captured officer at midday. The one man of the gully assault too hurt to run, dragged up out of the green ditch and propped in the shade of the gatehouse, and he was young and handsome under the grime in the way the enemy's people ran handsome, fair and high-cheeked, and frightened, and willing, in the end, to trade what he knew for water and a road home. Eleanor crouched before him in the heat with a cup in her ruined hands, and did not threaten him, because she had nothing left to threaten anyone with, and had learned that this was a strength. You came down the pass certain, she said. Tell me why. He drank, and his eyes went sidelong to Brennan's blade and back to her face, and found there something that frightened him more than the sword. A calm. We were told, he said, in the thick border common tongue. 3 nights, then the door opens. The cook would show the light. We were the first through, the hand that opens the latch from inside. Behind us, he swallowed. Behind us, my lady, in the high valleys, 10 days back, there is more. Much more. We were the key. The key turns, the host follows. By the next dark of the moon they meant to be past the fells, and onto the king's roads, and there was talk through the camp of a baron of the east rising to meet them, and of a friend at the king's own court who would swear the marches had fallen of their own rot, and not by any treason at all. He looked at the gold light on the black stone, as though seeing it for the first time. We were not to fight. We were to walk in. Nobody told us the door would have a woman behind it. The dark of the moon, Eleanor repeated. She had been counting nights herself, on the road, in the tower, she knew the moon. 11 days. 11 days, the young man agreed, and shut his eyes. 11 days for a host 10 days back in the high valleys, to come down on a kingdom that did not know it was at war. And 5 of those days the road south to Ravenscourt, to the king's seat beyond it, to the man pouring wine at her husband's elbow. The arithmetic was very simple and very cruel. And Eleanor stood up out of her crouch in the hammering noon, with it cold and whole in her chest, and she understood that she had perhaps 6 days to turn a blind kingdom's face toward the north, and not 1 hour to spare on grief or on the question of whether anyone south of the fells would believe a banished wife. What? She did not raise her voice. She no longer had to. Can you ride? Truly ride, hard, with that arm. To the end of the world, my lady. Then you are riding to the next world over. She was already moving, calling for the maps Maddox had kept. There were maps, good ones, in the dead man's tidy stores, the maps of a man who needed to know every garrison and every road. There are 6 border keeps strung along these fells between here and the soft country. Voss, Aldous, Marlow, Crail unmade Greywater, because Greywater holds the only pass a host can bring horse through. But the other 5 hold the bridle paths, and they have not been rotted, only forgotten. Their commanders will not know me. They will know this. She drew her own ring from her finger, the ring whose seal a forger had copied to ruin her, and pressed it into the warm wax of a fresh written page, and the raven of the duchy bit clean into it. A Duchess of Ravensmore calls the border garrisons to muster. Whatever they have heard of me, they have heard nothing of the host in the high valleys, and a soldier left in the dark for years will follow the first voice that tells him the truth, and means it. I have learnt that this fortnight too. By the 3rd day the dust on the southern road was raised not by 7 men dwindling, but by a column coming on. Eleanor sat her horse at a crossroads shrine in the Brown Fell country, where, a lifetime ago, she had watched an old woman make a sign against ill fortune at her passing, and she watched the garrison of Holt's Edge come down the bridle path to her muster. 60 men, under a lean grey captain named Forrester, who had held a forgotten keep for 9 years and never once been sent so much as a barrel of nails. He drew rein before her and looked at the banner she had made them stitch through 2 nights, the Raven of Ravensmore, but quartered now with a broken tower made whole, the device of a hold that had held. And he looked at the woman beneath it in her ruined indigo and her bound hands, and at the hard-faced men of Greywater drawn up at her back, who had been, a week past, the laughing-stock and terror of the marches. Their saying along the paths, Forrester began, gruff, wary, that the thrown-away Duchess has gone mad up at Greywater, and is raising the border in her own name against the king. They are saying it because a man at court wishes it said, Eleanor answered. Ride to my left hand and judge for yourself whether I am mad, Captain, and in 6 days you may tell the king to my face that his border did not fall asleep, that it woke. She leaned toward him in the saddle, and the wind off the fells lifted the loose hair at her temple, warm and dry and smelling of stone and bruised heather. There is a host coming down the Greywater Pass at the dark of the moon, and a baron rising in the east to meet it, and not a soul south of these hills knows it, but the men behind me. You have held an empty path 9 years for a kingdom that forgot your name. Here is the hour it was all for. Will you spend it asleep, or will you come and be remembered? Forrester looked a long moment at the banner of the mended tower. Then he turned his horse to her left hand without a word, and his 60 fell in behind her 100. And the column that left the crossroads shrine was no longer a garrison fleeing a tomb. It was the beginning of an army. It grew on the road as a stream grows. Garrison after garrison came down to the seal of the Raven and the mended tower, the men of Holt's Edge and Carrow Ford, and the 3 sisters' keeps, lean forgotten soldiers who had held the bridle paths in the dark for years and wept, some of them, openly, to be at last called by someone who knew they were there. By the 5th day, Eleanor rode at the head of near 500, hard border men who knew every fold of the fells, and the word ran ahead of her down into the soft golden country, the way the word of her disgrace had once run, but turned now, inside out, so that the cottagers who had shut their doors at the sight of her colours came out instead into the wheat-gold evening to watch the banished Duchess pass at the head of a host, and did not make the sign against ill fortune, and some of them, the old soldiers among them, took down their grandfather's bills from over the hearth and fell in. She did not feel like the kingdom's finest army. She felt like 500 tired people on dusty horses. But she had learned, this fortnight, that the difference between a rabble and an army is only whether someone has remembered to tell them what they are for, and she told them, every dusk, around the fires, until they began to believe it before she did. On the 6th day she came in sight of Ravenscourt, and she learned how nearly she had come too late. The golden gardens she had last seen shimmering in July heat lay quiet under an evening haze, the gravel walks pale as bone, the roses gone heavy and overblown on their stems, and across the great south lawn, where she had once walked as a bride, stood drawn up the cold ranks of the king's own household guard, 300 strong in royal scarlet, their pikes a steel hedge in the slanting sun. They had not come north to meet the host in the valleys. No one had told them of the host in the valleys. They had come to Ravenscourt, she would learn, to take the Duke of Ravensmore in the king's name for treason with the Eastern Baron Caro, on the strength of letters, in a duchess's hand, sealed with a duchess's ring, found riding for the enemy line. The trap had 2 jaws. Eleanor saw it whole in the moment she crested the rise and looked down on the scarlet ranks. Crail had not only opened the northern door, he had arranged for the kingdom's strength to be facing the wrong way entirely, gathered here, at Ravenscourt, around the throat of an innocent man, while 10 days north a host came down an unwatched pass. By the time the king's guard discovered they had arrested the realm's most loyal sword on forged evidence, the dark of the moon would have come, and the enemy would be on the king's roads, and there would be no border army left to stop them. Because the border army was here, exhausted, behind a banished wife, looking very much in the amber evening light like a rebel host come to free a traitor duke by force. My lady. Forrester had come up beside her, and his lean face was grim. 300 royal guard, drawn for a fight, and 500 of us, fell weary, looking for all the world like exactly what that man at court will have told them we are. We ride down there, we look like treason proving itself. They'll lower the pikes, and we'll have a battle on the king's own lawn, border against crown, and whoever's left standing, the man in the valleys wins. It was the lowest moment Eleanor had known, lower than the gallery, lower than the bailey, lower even than the broken tower in the wind. She sat her horse on the rise above the gardens where she had been a bride, and she looked at the steel hedge around her husband, and the old cold belief rose up in her like bitter water from a stopped well. That Julian had cast her out without a charge she could answer. That he had chosen, on a forger's word, to believe the very worst of her. That the man down there, in the ring of scarlet, had never truly seen his wife at all, only the convenient shape of a traitor, and would not see her now though she came at the head of an army to save his life. He had thrown her away in an hour. He would not, she told herself, looking down at the cold pikes, believe her in 1,000. My lady? Forrester said again. Lo, your word. My word, Eleanor said, is that we do not ride down there as an army. She unbuckled Halloran's sword from her hip and handed it, scabbard and all, to the astonished captain. An army proves the lie. Hold the host here, on the rise, in plain sight, where they can be counted and seen to do nothing. 500 men standing still on a hilltop with their hands from their hilts is not a rebellion. It is a question the king's men will have to ask before they answer. She gathered her reins. And I am going to go down and answer it. Alone, with empty hands and a saddlebag full of the truth. They'll take you. They'll clap you in irons beside him. Then they will have both of us in one room, Eleanor said, which is exactly where I need us to be. She rode down the long slope into the gardens of Ravenscourt, with her hands open on her thighs and a herald's white cloth tied to her whip. And the scarlet ranks turned to face her, and a captain of the household guard rode out with a dozen at his back and his pike levelled. And behind him, in the ring of steel on the south lawn, she saw Julian. He stood bare-headed in the amber light, his hands bound before him, his dark head up, and even cast as a traitor he stood like a man holding a border, broad shoulders filling the space the guard had penned him into, his grave, hard face turned, in that moment, toward the rise where 500 silent men stood beneath a banner he did not know. She saw the instant he found her in the descending rider. She saw it go through him like a blade. 2 years his wife, sent 5 days north to Moulder, and here she came down his ruined gardens at the head of a host, and whatever he had believed of her in the gallery, he could not have believed this. Hold! The guard captain barked, and his pike point hovered at her breast. Name yourself, and call off that rabble on the hill. Or by the king's law, I am Eleanor, Duchess of Ravensmore, she said. And her voice carried across the lawn the way it had carried off Blackstone, clear and cold and ringing in the warm evening, so that the scarlet ranks heard it, and the man in their midst heard it. And the rabble on the hill is the border army of the Marches, who 6 days ago broke an enemy host at the Greywater Pass that this court does not yet know existed. I have not come to free a traitor. I have come to show the king's men they are arresting the wrong one, and to put into your hands the proof of who the right one is. The man who forged the letters you hold sits in this house. He pours the Duke's wine. His name is Crail. And if you send for him now, this moment, before he hears that I am here, you will have your traitor by nightfall. She lifted her bound-up, blistered hands so they could all see them, black yet, with the pitch of a well 300 miles north. I will give you my person freely. I ask one thing in exchange. Send for Crail, and let me face him in front of the Duke and your own officers, and let the truth do what truth does. If I lie, you lose nothing. You have me and the Duke both, and my army stands idle on a hill. If I tell the truth, you save the kingdom a great deal more than one duke. It seems to me a poor wager to refuse. The guard captain was a hard man, and not a fool, and he looked from the woman with the ruined hands to the silent, disciplined host on the rise that had, indeed, done nothing, and made no move to free anyone, and he weighed the cost of being wrong. Bring the steward Crail to the gallery, he said at last to one of his dozen. And the Duke. And her. He looked down at Eleanor. If this is a player's trick, my lady, you'll wish you had stayed in the north. I have spent a fortnight wishing a great many things, Eleanor said, swinging down into the gravel she had last trodden as a bride. Wishing has not once changed the weather. Let us go and see what the truth changes. They brought them all together in the long gallery where it had begun. The same gallery, the same tall windows pouring the same gold over the same overblown roses, and Eleanor stood in the heart of it in her ruined gown, and felt the whole shape of her fortnight close like a ring. Julian was set at one side under guard. The king's captain and 3 of his officers stood at the center, and through the far door, summoned and unsuspecting, came Crail. He was beautiful. That was the thing she had not known, and might have guessed. That a hand so patient and a cruelty so practiced would wear a fine face, smooth and fair and unhurried. A man of perhaps 30 in sober dark velvet, with a silver chain of office across his breast, and the quiet, courteous eyes of someone who has never once in his life raised his voice, because he has never once needed to. He came in smoothing his cuffs, mild, attentive, the very picture of the loyal steward answering his master's call. And then he saw her, and for the smallest part of a heartbeat the smooth, fair face went perfectly still, the way a frozen pond goes still, and Eleanor saw it, and knew that everyone in the room had seen it too. Master Crail. She did not let the silence grow. You wrote that I would weep in my chamber and trouble nothing. I have come 300 miles to tell you to your face how poorly you read me. My lady. He recovered as smoothly as water closing. Forgive me, we had word you were unwell in the north. I rejoice to see you restored. Though I confess I do not understand, he turned, all gentle bewilderment, to the king's captain, why a banished traitress is permitted to stand in this gallery and address an honest servant of the crown. Because the honest servant of the crown, Eleanor said, kept a man at Greywater Hold these 3 years to stop the garrison's well and signal an enemy host down the pass. And that man, before the door closed for good, told me your name. She did not raise her voice. She had learned from Brennan, from Maddox even, that the quiet ones had already decided. And she had decided. His name was Maddox. He cooked there. He said, and I will give you his words, exactly, that you wrote him I would be no trouble, a spoilt court lady who'll weep in her chamber, and trouble nothing. Did you write him those words, Master Crail. Think before you answer. There are 4 of the king's officers listening, and they will remember which way you jump. I have never in my life heard the name, Crail said, and his voice was perfect, warm and faintly pitying. My lady, grief and exile have plainly disordered you. A cook at the end of the kingdom, telling tales? Against this? He spread his elegant hands. I have served his grace 3 years. I keep his correspondence. I have given the king's own officers the letters, in her hand, my lords, sealed with her ring, that prove her commerce with the rebel Caro. That is not a tale. That is wax and ink. Where is hers? A dying cook's whisper in a cursed tower? No, Eleanor said. Mine is wax and ink too. And she opened the saddlebag at her hip. She laid it on the long table between them piece by piece, in the gold light, and she made them watch her do it, because she had learned that men believe what they see done with hands. The masked lantern, its hood half melted, one horn pane cracked, the coil of cord, the square of oiled cloth, and the orders, the false orders, sealed with the raven and the broken tower, recalling her escort and forbidding Greywater reinforcement, which she unfolded and turned and set before the king's captain with one black-nailed finger laid against the signature. This came to me 6 days ago, she said. It bears the Duke's seal. It bears the Duke's name. Captain, you have seen the Duke's hand on 100 dispatches in this campaign. Read it, and tell this room whether the Duke of Ravensmore wrote it. She held the captain's eye. And then take up one of the letters Master Crail gave you, the letters in my hand that ruined me, and lay the 2 beside each other. The same forger drew them both. He is very good. He is good enough to deceive a court and a king. He copied my husband's hand and my own with the same loving care, and he made only one mistake in 3 years. She turned, at last, to Julian, who stood bound and silent and white to the lips at the side of the gallery. He never reckoned that a wife might know her husband's hand the way she knows his step on the floor. I have 2 years of your terse little notes folded in the bottom of my trunk, Julian. I knew this was not yours before I had read 3 words of it. It is too patient to be you. You never in your life crossed a letter as though you were striking something out, except when you crossed me out, and that you did in person. The captain bent over the 2 papers. He laid them side by side in the slanting sun, the false ducal order and the false duchess's letter, and the whole gallery hung on the small movement of his eyes from one to the other and back. A clock ticked somewhere. Outside the tall windows a thrush sang in the overblown roses, careless of all of it. They are the same hand, the captain said slowly. God's truth. The same downstroke. The same hand wrote both. He looked up, and his face had changed. Master Crail, you gave us these letters from the Duke's correspondence. You alone keep that correspondence. You alone had the Duke's seal to your hand, and the Duke's writing under your eye 3 years together. And Crail, who had never once in his life raised his voice, raised it now. It happened very fast. He went for the door he had come in by, and he was quick, and there was a small bright thing in his hand. Eleanor saw the silver wink of it. A poniard slid from his sleeve, and she understood, in the half-second she had, that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature in any room, and that she was no longer the only such creature present. He meant to take the Duchess to the door with the blade at her throat and bargain his way out. He came at her smooth and certain and contemptuous, the way the rider on the pale horse had come at a wall he thought was a corpse. She did not run, because she had learned that running before you have begun is how you are lost. She turned with the rush instead of against it, the way Halloran had taught her to turn a horse, the way she had turned an old cook in a high, windy room. And she had no sword now, but she had her ruined hands, and she caught the wrist with the bright blade in both of them, and bore it down and aside, with the whole weight of a fortnight behind it. And Julian, bound as he was, threw himself across the gap between them, and took Crail to the floor of the gallery with his shoulder, And then the king's officers were on the steward in a scarlet wave, and the poniard skittered away bright across the parquet, and lay still. In the silence after, Eleanor stood breathing hard over the smooth, fair face pressed to the floor by 3 men's hands, and Crail turned his cheek against the wood and looked up at her, and the courteous mildness was gone at last, burned clean away, and what was under it was not a monster at all, but a small, cold, flat thing. The look of a man who had decided long ago that nothing mattered, and had spent his life proving it to everyone he could reach. "You should have wept in your chamber," he said. "So everyone keeps telling me," said Eleanor. "They took him out." The captain gathered the lantern and the cord and the 2 damning letters with his own hands, and turned to Eleanor, and to her quiet astonishment went down on one knee to her in the gold light among the scattered evidence of her ruin. "My lady, there is a host coming down the Greywater Pass at the dark of the moon, you say, and a baron rising to meet it, and the king's strength facing the wrong way entirely." He rose. "The dark of the moon is 5 nights off. If your border men can ride, my border men can ride," said Eleanor, "and they know every fold of those fells in the dark, which the king's scarlet does not. Bring your 300, and join them to my 5. Send to the king tonight for the rest, and we will have a true army between the enemy and the kingdom before the moon goes black. I have broken the door once already. I find it is a thing one gets better at with practice." She glanced toward the rise beyond the windows where the host still stood. "But that is a council for an hour from now." First, her voice, which had not shaken once through any of it, betrayed her at last on a single word. "First, will someone please cut my husband's hands free?" They cut him free. The officers withdrew to the far end of the long gallery to give the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmore the only privacy a room full of soldiers can offer, which is the privacy of being studiously not watched, and Julian crossed the parquet to her, rubbing the marks of the cord from his wrists, and stopped an arm's length away, and looked at her, truly looked, the way he had not looked in the gallery a fortnight past, when his eyes had moved over her, and something had flickered and died. "I cast you out," he said. His voice was not cold now. It was wrecked. On his word. On wax and ink. "I tried you in a court of 1 and would not give you the charge, and I put you on a horse in July and told you to mind the heat, and sent you 5 days north to a place I knew, Eleanor, was where men are sent who are not meant to return." His hand lifted toward her ruined ones and stopped, not daring. "And you came back at the head of an army to save the life of the man who did it to you. I do not understand it. I do not deserve to." "No," she agreed. "You do not." He flinched and took it and did not look away, and she found that she loved him for the not looking away more than she had ever loved the grave, handsome face in the cathedral at Ardennes. "I asked you for the truth that morning," she said. "You gave me a road, so I will give you the truth now, since one of us must begin." She stepped closer, into the space his stopped hand had not dared to cross, and she took his hands and laid them over her broken ones so he would feel the pitch and the blisters, the whole cost of it, written into her skin. "I came back for you, because somewhere on a wall in the dark, between the well and the tower, I stopped being the woman you threw away, and started being someone who would not let a patient liar have the kingdom. And you, Julian, are part of the kingdom. The largest part, to me, God help my judgment. I did not ride 300 miles to forgive you. I have not decided whether I forgive you. I rode them because I would not give Crail the one thing he wanted, which was for me to lie down in the north and let him take everything, including you." Her voice dropped. "Hating you would have been lying down. I found I could not afford it. Then let me earn the deciding." He turned his bound, marked wrists so that he held her hands now, gently, around the hurt. "I will go to the king myself and lay down the marches into your hand. The command of the border army is yours, in law and in the field. And I will ride under your banner to the pass and take my orders from my wife in front of the whole host, and let the peerage make of that what it will. I will give up the thing I have held longest, which is the belief that I am always the one who must be obeyed. It is the only cost I have that is worth anything." He bent his dark head. "It is yours, whether you keep me or not." It was, she thought, a real apology with a real cost, the surrender of the one power he had never in his life laid down, and she had learned this fortnight to know the genuine article from the forged. She stood in the gold light of the gallery where he had ruined her, with the thrush still singing in the overblown roses outside, and she felt the bitter water in her, the stopped well of 2 years and a fortnight, begin at last to move and run clean. "Keep you," she said softly. "You are a great deal of trouble, Julian. You forge nothing. You copy no one's hand. You cannot tell a true letter from a false one to save your life or mine, and yet I find I have ridden a very long way to be standing exactly here." She let him see it, all of it, the thing the rules of her old life would have had her keep behind her teeth. "Yes, I keep you. Now take your border army's first order. Send the swiftest rider you have to the king, and the second swiftest to your kitchens, because your wife has held a cursed hold, and broken a host, and unmasked your steward all on hard cheese, and stopped water, and she would like, before she saves the kingdom, to sit down at her own table and eat." The dark of the moon found the border army strung across the Greywater Pass in the warm summer dark, and what came down out of the high valleys to meet it found no open door and no rotten garrison, but the mended fortress at the throat of the fells lit like a beacon, and 5,000 men of the marches in the crown ranged in the night under a banner of a raven and a tower made whole. And the host that had been promised a kingdom for the walking turned in the high passes and did not come down, and the baron in the east, hearing of it, burned his treasonous letters and rode hard for the coast and was not seen in the realm again. There was a reckoning, and it was hard, and Eleanor was in the field for all of it, at her husband's side or ahead of him, and the kingdom that had once whispered the name Greywater as a curse learned to say it another way entirely. But that is the matter of histories, and this was only ever the story of a banished wife, and so it ends where such stories should, at a table, in the gold light of a late summer evening, 3 months on. They sat at the small table in the morning room at Ravenscourt that looked over the south lawn, where the roses had been cut back and would bloom better for it next year, and the long heat of July had eased into the mellow gold of September. And Eleanor's hands, healed now, scarred faintly across both palms, in a way no court glove would ever quite hide, broke bread and passed it. Brennan held Greywater still, a true captain of a true garrison, and wrote her dispatches in a large painful hand. Watt was learning his letters from Forrester. The kingdom was awake. "I have had a petition," Julian said from the College of Heralds. "They are much exercised about the new quartering on our banner, the mended tower. They say there is no precedent for a device commemorating a fortress that was never lost, only nearly so, and they should like to know on whose authority it was granted." "And what did you tell them?" "That it was granted on the authority of the woman who mended the tower," he said, grave as ever, buttering his bread with great care, "and that if the College of Heralds wished to dispute the matter, they were welcome to ride 5 days north in July and take it up with the garrison directly. I find they have not pressed the point." He glanced up, and there it was at last in the dark grave face she had married. The thing that had been buried under 2 years of duty and a fortnight of cruelty, surfacing dry and warm and entirely unexpected. "I did mention there is a well at the far end, with a charming view." It was not much of a joke. It was, in fact, a very small and dry joke from a man who had not made one in the whole 2 years she had known him. But it caught her wholly off her guard, and she heard herself laugh. Really laugh, the sound startling them both, and she saw the startled pleasure of it go across his face. The wonder of a man learning he could make his wife laugh after all, and she put her scarred hand over his on the table in the September gold. "Mind the heat," she said. "Eleanor, no." She turned his hand over and laced her fingers through the scars and all. "You said it to me once, and meant it as a farewell. I am saying it to you, and I mean it as a promise. There will be more roads, and more hosts, and more patient men in fine velvet, who think a kingdom is a thing one can take by stopping a well in the dark. And every time, I will ride out into the worst heat of it, and so will you, beside me. Mind the heat, husband. We are neither of us the sort to be sent anywhere safe. Outside, a thrush sang in the cut-back roses, and the gravel walks were gold instead of bone, and the gallery window where he had once turned his back on her stood open to the warm evening air. But we will mind it together. That is the whole of my terms. You accepted them once already, in front of the king's officers. I am holding you to them. You hold everything to its terms, he said, and lifted her scarred hand to his lips and held it there. It is the most alarming thing about you. I have decided I cannot live without it. And that was the end of it.